So I want to start with the big picture. The European Union is successful at upstaking the choices of European people. The European Union is successful at maintaining liberal democracy both at the transnational and the national level. Now, of course, we all know the problems about Article 7, the difficulties that the European Union has with promoting or defending the rule of law at the national level in countries like Poland and Hungary. We can discuss that later, but the first thing we need to bear in mind is that the European Union has mechanisms for the choices of Europeans to be translated into policies. We keep seeing regular peaceful changes of government in the European Union. Now, this is not only the responsibility of the European Union, but to a large extent, and this is why I think we can reverse the question. Would Hungary and Poland still be, well, if not democracies, at least partial democracies or competitive autocracies, as some say, if they were not in the European Union? You can say, some people argue the European Union contributes to maintaining these regimes, but on the other hand, if it was not because of the European Union, probably these countries would no longer have any means of opposition and so on. So I would firstly start with this point: the EU is successful at keeping democracy, liberal exchanges, and public sphere. I would be totally opposed. I think the European Union has anticipated post-truth politics. The European Union ran in the 90s a blog countering the British tabloids' misperceptions or negative narratives about the European Union. Most seriously, the European Union, one of the first reactions of the European Union to the invasion of Crimea by the Russian Federation was precisely a campaign against fake news in Eastern and Central Europe. So I think the European Union has always been fast. Maybe it doesn't have sufficient means, we can discuss that at the end, but the European Union has been quick. Now, for those of us who follow regulatory politics, for those of us who research on regulatory responses to post-truth politics, to regulatory responses to disinformation, actually it is very difficult to follow what the European Union is doing. Ever since 2018, the European Union has adopted one new package every year. These packages often have 2, 3, 4 directives, regulations, recommendations coming together. So these, I don't think it is fair to say that the European Union is doing too little. Maybe the point is that it is doing too much and that it is not addressing the full picture, but in the realms of fighting disinformation, the European Union is probably achieving a good balance of policy instrument. I think there's a risk in post-truth politics. Of course, it is that we lose the public sphere, that we lose trust in institutions and so on, but there's also a risk, I don't want to say it is equivalent, but we should not undermine the risk of overdoing the response of liberal democracy to things like information. If we make all information suspicious, if we reduce the realm of dissenting opinion, if we reduce the realm of mere opinion that cannot necessarily be sustained by facts, we may be running the chance of decreasing the space for public discussion in the public sphere. So I would say, on the one hand, liberal democracy should be aware of the risks of post-truth politics and in particular disinformation, but they should not overdo their responses. And if we stick to the positive examples, I think one of the areas that is clearly in crisis, where I think liberal democracies are not responding well enough, is the crisis of the media, the crisis of journalism. Quality journalism is at risk in most European countries, but I think a good message comes, and because when we speak about democracies, we are not only thinking, or we should not only think about the government. I think liberal democracies have demonstrated an ability to respond with new ways of journalism, with smaller media, with activist journalism, taking up and enhancing pluralism in the public sphere. So I would look at this eclosion of small journals and TVs and so on as a sign of a vibrant democracy. Now, the big question is, the old media are very unstable, they often disappear very quickly. Can they really thrive? And I think this is where, on the one hand, society is striving for producing new ways of media, but probably there needs to be support both by the public and the private sector for these new forms of journalism and political communication and debate to take root. This is very important. I think the European Union's institutional structure, the competences that it has, make it or force the European institutions to focus mostly on disinformation campaigns, prevention, and some people say even attempts to control information. The European Union has come up with a code of practice on against disinformation that has been signed up by the main social media platform. There's a very good cooperation between these platforms and fact-checking. The European Union is, as I said before, probably has a good policy balance in relation to trying to prevent the massive spread of disinformation, and it's doing that in cooperation in terms of voluntary cooperation and co-regulation with the social platforms. Now, there's one area where the European Union has little competence, which is precisely the opposite of this policy if we want to have a virtuous circle, which is promote good quality information, promote civic education. I'm not saying that the European Union is doing nothing, but because education, but because things like the regulation of the journalistic profession and so on are very close to the heart of national democracy and national sovereignty, probably the European Union has done relatively little, not in terms of policy experimentation, probably it could do, or it should do much more in terms of policy support. So if we know it's very difficult to activate Article 7 against the Hungarian government and so on, at least it should be possible to massively support Hungarian civil society, Hungarian journalists, and so on. So this is an area where it is very difficult for the European Union to take massive action because of the distribution of competences, but this is an area where certainly member states should start incorporating much more between them.